Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we share powerful tales of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Today, we bring you a story of betrayal and redemption, as a family fights to uncover the truth and heal after unimaginable deception. Stay with us for this emotional journey of justice and hope. The Parker family was the picture of warmth and love. Ethan, a tall man with a confident yet kind demeanor, was adored by his wife Lauren and their 8-year-old daughter, Emily. Their days were filled with cherished family traditions, none more sacred than Saturday pancake mornings. Ethan would whisk the batter while Emily gleefully added chocolate chips, her small hands often sneaking a handful into her mouth. The kitchen would echo with their laughter, and Lauren would watch from the doorway, feeling immense gratitude for the life they'd built together. It was a typical sunny morning when Ethan prepared to leave for a week-long business trip. His suitcase sat by the door, neatly packed, while Emily clutched a crayon drawing she had made for him. "It's us at the park," she explained proudly, pointing at the stick figures. "You have to put it on your office wall." "Daddy!" Ethan crouched down to her level, his eyes soft with affection. "Of course. My little artist. This masterpiece deserves the best spot." He kissed her forehead and hugged her tightly before turning to Lauren. Their embrace was brief but warm. "I'll be back by Friday evening," he assured her. "Call me when you land," Lauren reminded him, her tone light but caring. Ethan's departure was uneventful, but it marked the beginning of something neither Lauren nor Emily could have predicted. That evening, he called from his hotel as promised, his voice cheerful but rushed. "Just got in," he said. "Long day tomorrow, but I'll call again." His words reassured Lauren. Though she missed his usual attention to detail, he hadn't even asked how her day had gone. The following days brought subtle but unsettling changes. Lauren sent Ethan a message during Emily's ballet practice, but hours passed before he replied with a curt, "Busy. All good." By midweek, his calls had grown infrequent, and when they did come, his tone lacked the warmth she was used to. Lauren told herself it was just work stress, though a gnawing unease began to settle in her chest. Friday arrived, but instead of the expected evening reunion, Ethan returned early that morning. Lauren, in the kitchen preparing breakfast, froze at the sound of the front door opening. She turned to see Ethan standing in the hallway with his suitcase in hand. "Surprise," he said with a strained smile. Emily came bounding down the stairs, squealing with excitement. "Daddy, you're home early." She threw her arms around his waist, but Ethan's hug felt stiff and perfunctory. "Missed you, kiddo," he said, patting her head before pulling away. Lauren studied him closely. Something wasn't right. "I thought you'd be back tonight," she said cautiously. Ethan shrugged. "Meetings wrapped up early. Figured I'd come home instead of sitting in a hotel." That evening, over dinner, the atmosphere felt heavier. Ethan seemed distracted, barely engaging in conversation. Emily, eager to restore normalcy, asked, "Daddy, will you read me my bedtime story tonight? The one about the fox and the moon." Ethan hesitated, as though he didn't recognize the title. "Of course," he replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just testing you to see if you remembered." Later, as Lauren lay in bed beside him, her unease grew. He called her Lauren and her full name, in a tone that felt oddly formal. He used to call her that only in jest, but tonight it sounded distant. Meanwhile, Emily, unable to sleep, tiptoed downstairs for a glass of water. She stopped when she saw Ethan standing by the fireplace, staring at a family photo. His expression was cold, almost calculating. She heard him whisper, almost there, before he walked away. Frightened, Emily hurried back to her room and buried herself under the covers. The next morning, Lauren's anxiety deepened when Ethan rejected the breakfast she made, claiming, "I don't eat this kind of stuff anymore." Pancakes, once a cherished ritual, were dismissed as silly traditions. Lauren tried to brush it off, but the growing distance in her husband's demeanor left her heart heavy. Emily, too, felt the shift. "Daddy doesn't call me his little artist anymore," she confided to Lauren one evening, her voice trembling. "He feels different." "Mommy." Lauren hugged her daughter tightly, whispering, "It's going to be okay." But deep down, she wasn't sure. Ethan's changes were subtle but undeniable, and the man she once knew felt like a stranger in their home. Little did they know, the truth behind his behavior would shatter their world. The growing unease in the Parker household weighed on Lauren like a heavy cloud. Ethan's behavior had become increasingly erratic, and the warm, loving man she once knew seemed to vanish entirely. He locked himself in his office for hours, dismissing questions with curt answers. He'd leave the house without explanation, often returning late, his demeanor cold and detached. Emily, too young to fully understand, clung to the small comforts she had left, like the bedtime stories Ethan once read to her. One night, she bravely approached him as he sat on the couch watching television. "Daddy," she asked hesitantly, "why don't you tuck me in anymore?" Ethan rubbed his temples, clearly irritated. "You're old enough to go to bed on your own now," he said, his tone devoid of affection. The words hit Emily like a blow. She nodded silently and shuffled off to her room, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Lauren's suspicions deepened when she found an expensive receipt in Ethan's jacket pocket for jewelry and clothing, a gift she had never received. Confronting him that evening, she asked, "Who is this for?" "Ethan?" He glanced at the receipt with a practiced calm. "It's a business gift," he replied flatly. "For a client." Lauren's heart sank further. Ethan was never one to spend frivolously, even for work. "Business gifts? Jewelry and clothes? That doesn't sound like you," she pressed. His jaw tightened. "Drop it, Lauren. It's nothing." But Lauren couldn't ignore the growing list of inconsistencies. The locked office door, the cryptic phone calls, the distant eyes that no longer looked at her the same way, all of it painted a picture of a man she barely recognized. She stayed up late that night, piecing together the fragments of her suspicions. In her heart, she knew something was terribly wrong, but the scope of the truth eluded her. Emily was not blind to the changes. She had always been perceptive, more so than her age suggested. Late one night, unable to sleep, she wandered downstairs for a glass of water. As she passed Ethan's office, she heard his voice through the door, pressing her ear against it. She caught snippets of his conversation. "It's almost done," he said in a low, urgent tone. "Once the divorce is finalized, the money will be ours." Emily froze, her little heart pounding in her chest. Who was he talking to? And what did he mean by ours? She hurried back upstairs, clutching her rabbit tightly as tears filled her eyes. "That's not Daddy," she whispered to herself. "It can't be." The tension reached its breaking point during a custody hearing that Ethan unexpectedly filed for. Lauren, blindsided by the legal papers, was torn between anger and disbelief. Ethan's calm and calculated demeanor during the proceedings unnerved her. But Emily's courage would soon unravel the entire facade. As the judge asked questions about the family dynamic, Emily stood from her seat and in a trembling but determined voice, declared, "He's not my dad." The courtroom fell silent, every eye turning to the little girl standing in the aisle. The judge leaned forward, her tone measured. "Emily, can you explain what you mean?" Emily nodded, her small hands trembling as she clutched her stuffed rabbit. "He doesn't call me his little artist anymore," she said, her voice quivering. "My real daddy always calls me that. And I heard him on the phone. He said, once the money is ours, it'll be over. He's not my daddy." The weight of Emily's words hit Lauren like a freight train, her stomach twisting in both fear and fury. The judge, now visibly alarmed, ordered a DNA test to confirm Ethan's identity. Across the room, Ethan, or the man pretending to be him, sat frozen, his face pale and jaw tight. When the results arrived, the courtroom erupted in shock. The man claiming to be Ethan Parker was not who he said he was. He was Victor, Ethan's twin brother, a man no one knew existed, consumed by jealousy over their vastly different lives. Victor had kidnapped Ethan and taken his place, hoping to steal everything from him: his wife, his daughter, and his life. Lauren's mind reeled as the horrifying truth unraveled. Ethan had been held captive for weeks in a remote cabin, and the man she thought was her husband was a stranger, a predator who had meticulously planned to destroy their family. Emily, clutching her mother's hand, whispered, "I told you it wasn't him." "Mommy." Lauren hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You were so brave." "Sweetheart," she whispered. But deep inside, Lauren knew the nightmare was far from over. They had found the imposter, but the real Ethan was still out there, waiting to be rescued. And Lauren vowed to do whatever it took to bring him home. The days following Victor's unmasking were a whirlwind of fear, hope, and relentless determination. The Parker family was shattered, but Lauren's resolve to reunite her family only grew stronger. Ethan was still out there, somewhere, held captive by his twin brother. Every hour that passed without him felt like an eternity. Lauren worked closely with the authorities, providing every detail she could about Victor's behavior, his movements, and the strange phone calls she overheard. Finally, a break came. A crumpled receipt found in Victor's belongings led investigators to a remote area in the woods. GPS data and surveillance footage confirmed multiple trips to an abandoned cabin, deep and isolated. A search team was dispatched immediately, their vehicles tearing down winding roads toward what they hoped was Ethan's location. Lauren stayed behind, pacing the living room with Emily close by her side. Emily had spent the last few days drawing pictures of her family, each one featuring Ethan holding her hand. "Do you think they'll find Daddy, Mommy?" Emily asked, her voice small but hopeful. Lauren knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart," she said firmly, though her own heart trembled with uncertainty. "They'll find him, and he'll come home to us." The raid on the cabin was swift but tense. The officers moved cautiously, weapons drawn, their flashlights cutting through the darkness of the dilapidated structure. The stench of decay and neglect filled the air. In the far corner of the main room, tied to a chair, was Ethan. He was barely conscious, his clothes tattered, his body gaunt and frail from weeks of malnourishment. "We've got him," an officer called out, his voice urgent. Ethan's eyes fluttered open as the officers freed him. "Help me," he rasped, his voice weak but filled with relief. As he was carried out on a stretcher, he managed to whisper, "Is my family okay?" The officers assured him they were. And for the first time in weeks, A flicker of hope returned to Ethan's weary eyes. The reunion at the hospital was emotional. Lauren and Emily rushed through the sterile hallways, their hearts pounding as they approached Ethan's room. When they saw him lying in the bed, hooked up to fours and monitors, Lauren's breath caught in her throat. He looked so fragile, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw them. "Daddy!" Emily cried, climbing onto the chair beside his bed and throwing her arms around him as gently as she could. Ethan hugged her weakly, tears streaming down his face. "My little artist," he whispered, his voice cracked but full of love. Lauren stepped forward, tears spilling from her eyes as she placed a hand on his cheek. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice breaking. "You're home." Ethan looked at her, his expression filled with guilt and relief. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry for what he put you through." Lauren shook her head, gripping his hand tightly. "You're here now. That's all that matters." Over the following days, Ethan recounted his ordeal. "Victor ambushed me during my trip," he explained, his voice halting and raw. "He drugged me and took me to that cabin. He told me he was going to take my life, not just my identity, but everything. He blamed me for everything that went wrong in his life." Lauren listened, her heart breaking as she pieced together the years of resentment Victor had harbored. "I didn't tell you about him," Ethan admitted, his voice trembling. "We hadn't spoken in decades. I thought he'd moved on." As Ethan healed, the authorities worked to bring Victor to justice. The trial was tense and emotional, with Lauren, Ethan, and even Emily taking the stand to recount their experiences. Emily's testimony moved the courtroom to tears. "He wasn't my daddy," she said bravely, her small voice steady. "My real daddy calls me his little artist. And this man, he didn't care about me or mommy. Victor, ever the manipulator, tried to play the victim. His lawyer painted him as a man driven by a traumatic childhood, desperate to reclaim a life he thought was stolen from him. But the evidence was damning. The receipts, phone recordings, and testimony from his accomplice, Monica Carter, left no room for doubt. Monica, though claiming she was manipulated, admitted to aiding Victor in his plan to steal Ethan's life. The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with their verdict. Victor was found guilty on all counts, including identity theft, fraud, kidnapping, and attempted murder, as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Victor glared at Ethan, his eyes filled with venom. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You'll always be the reason our family was destroyed." Ethan's hand tightened around Lauren's as Victor was led away, his words lingering like a shadow. But Lauren leaned in, her voice soft but firm. "He's wrong. Ethan, you didn't destroy anything. You fought to come back to us. And that's all that matters." The weeks that followed were focused on healing. The Parker family slowly rebuilt their lives, finding solace in the small joys they once took for granted. Saturday mornings were once again filled with the smell of pancakes and the sound of Emily's laughter. "You're getting pretty good at this," Ethan teased as Emily carefully flipped a pancake. "I had a good teacher," she replied with a grin. One crisp autumn afternoon, the family visited the park where so many of their happiest memories had been made. Emily ran ahead, her laughter ringing through the air as she climbed the jungle gym. Ethan and Lauren sat on a bench, their shoulders touching as they watched her. "We've been through so much," Ethan said quietly. "But she's so strong. She gets that from you." Lauren smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "She gets it from us," she said softly. "And we're stronger now. Together." as the sun set, painting the sky in warm hues of orange and pink. The family walked hand in hand toward their car. The shadows of Victor's betrayal still lingered, but they were no longer weighed down by fear. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next, knowing that their love and resilience would see them through. For the Parkers, the road to healing had just begun, but they were walking it together, and that was all that mattered. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story on Empathy Stories. We hope the Parker family's journey has inspired you to believe in the strength of love, truth, and healing. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope and compassion to life. See you next time.